It was Christmas dinner, the table glowing with candles, laughter echoing around me as plates of food passed from hand to hand. And in the middle of this seemingly perfect holiday scene, my mother turned her head, looked straight at me, and said words that froze me in place. "You're the most useless child we have." For a moment I couldn't breathe, the sting of her voice sharper than any winter wind outside. And the room went silent, forks paused midair, eyes darting between me and her. Imagine announcing your engagement on what should be the happiest night of your life, only to be humiliated by your own mother in front of everyone. Before I tell you how I answered back and turned the entire evening upside down, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever been humiliated by a family member in front of others, because sometimes it's in those breaking points that we finally find our strength. My name is Emily, and I'm the middle child in a family where my worth was always questioned. I grew up in a house where success meant whatever my siblings did and failure meant whatever I did. From childhood on, I was labeled the quiet one, the unremarkable one, the one who just blended into the background. What no one ever knew was that for years I was the one silently holding our family together financially. My father's medical bills? I paid them. My mother's car payments? I covered those every single month. When my brother maxed out his credit cards and faced collection calls, it was me wiring him the money that saved his credit. And when my sister called me in tears over rent, it was my account that sent the transfer. I did all of this without fanfare, without demanding recognition, because I thought family meant sacrifice and that love didn't need applause. But every sacrifice I made was met not with gratitude but with criticism. I was told I wasn't ambitious enough, not successful enough, not as bright as the others. They mocked my job even though my steady paycheck was the only reason their crises didn't collapse the entire household. The irony of being the backbone of a family that saw me as disposable was almost laughable, if it hadn't been so deeply painful. Still, I stayed silent, convincing myself that maybe love really was about giving endlessly. Until that night. That Christmas dinner wasn't just another holiday gathering. It was supposed to be my moment. The evening I introduced my fiancé to the family and shared our joy about the future we were building. Instead, it turned into the night my mother stripped me of dignity in front of everyone, calling me useless just as I tried to tell them the happiest news of my life. And that's when something inside me snapped. Years of quiet endurance, years of biting my tongue, years of writing checks behind the scenes, they all boiled over in one instant. My mother thought she was humiliating me. But what she didn't know was that I had been preparing for this confrontation without even realizing it. Because every bill, every transfer, every receipt was proof. Proof that the most useless child had actually been the only one keeping this family afloat. And I was done letting them treat me as invisible. That night I found my voice, and what happened next left my entire family in stunned silence. When my mother's words rang out across the Christmas table calling me the most useless child she had, I felt something heavy and familiar rise inside me, a mixture of shame and rage that had been building for years. But this time I did not swallow it back down the way I always had. This time I let it burn through me and turn into clarity. And for the first time in my life I was ready to let them all see who I really was and what I had really done. The silence at the table stretched on as everyone's eyes flickered to me, waiting for me to laugh it off or to excuse myself like I had so many times before, because I was always the one who walked away, the one who avoided conflict, the one who carried the invisible weight in silence. But I didn't move. I sat there, hands resting on the table, engagement ring glinting under the light. And I realized that I was done hiding, because the truth is that for years I had been their safety net, their rescuer, their unacknowledged provider, and I had proof in black and white. Before I could speak though, my brother smirked and muttered, "Well, she's not wrong," earning a chuckle from my sister who quickly added, "At least you're consistent." Their laughter broke whatever thin thread of restraint I had left. I had wanted to share good news that night, to celebrate love and future and family, but instead they chose to humiliate me again, so I made a choice. I decided that if they wanted a scene, I would give them one they would never forget. My fiancé squeezed my hand under the table, a subtle reminder that I was not alone. And in his eyes I saw permission, encouragement, a spark that told me it was time to stop letting myself be trampled. So I pushed back my chair slowly, deliberately, and I stood up, the wood scraping against the floor like a drumbeat announcing the start of something new. "You want to call me useless?" I said, my voice calm but carrying across the table. "Then let's talk about useless, let's talk about who's been paying whose bills." The shift in the room was immediate. My father's fork clattered onto his plate, my brother's smirk faltered, and even my mother's confident glare wavered for just a second, because they had no idea what was coming. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, one I had carried with me for months. Not because I planned this confrontation, but because I had gotten used to keeping records, to filing away every transfer, every payment, every receipt. Years of being taken for granted had taught me to document everything, and now that instinct had armed me with exactly what I needed. I opened the folder and began pulling out papers, laying them one by one on the table in front of the turkey and the cranberry sauce. "This," I said, holding up a payment confirmation, "is your car note from last year, Mom. Paid in full by me. And this one here is the payment for Dad's hospital stay, when insurance wouldn't cover the rest. And here," I slapped down another paper, "is the transfer I made to cover Alex's credit card debt when the collectors were calling non-stop. And this one is for Sophie's rent last spring when she swore she was going to be homeless. All of these, every single one, came out of my pocket, from my salary that you all claim isn't good enough, from my job that you all love to mock. Tell me again how useless I am." My mother's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words that would not come. My siblings sat frozen, their laughter gone, replaced by wide-eyed shock as they stared at the pile of receipts that told a story none of them had ever cared to hear. I felt years of humiliation lift from my shoulders as I spoke louder, steadier, stronger. "I have been paying for this family while you all sneered at me. I covered your emergencies, your mistakes, your irresponsibility, and I never once asked for a thank you. I stayed quiet because I believed family should help each other. But instead of gratitude, I was treated like trash, like I was nothing. And tonight, after everything I've done, you dared to humiliate me in front of my fiancé. Well, congratulations, because now the truth is out." The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace in the corner. My fiancé's hand was warm in mine, grounding me, reminding me that I was not the desperate child seeking approval anymore. I was a grown woman who finally realized that the power had always been mine to claim. My father cleared his throat and muttered something about not knowing, but I cut him off, years of anger sharpening my voice. "Of course you didn't know because no one bothered to ask, no one bothered to notice. I was good enough to bail you out but never good enough to respect. That ends tonight." I looked around the table at each face that had dismissed me, belittled me, used me, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time I wasn't pleading to be seen, I was declaring my worth. And then I delivered the final blow. "Here's the thing," I said, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "This was the last time. There will be no more payments, no more rescues, no more me cleaning up your messes. From now on, I live my life for myself with the man I love, building our own future. And if you can't respect me, then you don't get to be part of it. I am not useless, I am done being used." The weight of my words lingered in the air, and I could see the cracks forming in the carefully constructed illusion of superiority they had built over me for so long. My mother's eyes flashed with something between anger and fear, my brother shifted uncomfortably, and my sister suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting. They were speechless, and in that silence I found freedom. It wasn't about revenge for me anymore, it was about truth, about finally stepping into the light of my own strength and refusing to let anyone dim it again. And as I sat back down beside my fiancé, who looked at me with pride and love, I realized that sometimes the most powerful revenge is not screaming, not fighting, but simply telling the truth and setting boundaries that no one can cross again. The moment I sat back down with my fiancé's hand still wrapped around mine, I realized something had shifted forever, because the people who had always held power over me through criticism and manipulation were suddenly powerless in the face of undeniable proof. My mother stared at the receipts like they were ghosts haunting her perfect illusion of control. And for once she couldn't spin the narrative or twist my words into weakness because the truth was ink on paper right in front of her. My father shifted uncomfortably, muttering that this wasn't the time or place, but I looked at him and calmly said, "You had years to make the time and the place, but you never did. Tonight, you made it the time when you called me useless." My brother tried to laugh it off with a forced chuckle, saying something about how I was being dramatic, but I reached into the folder again and pulled out the transfer receipt of the exact amount I had wired him when his credit score was about to collapse. "Dramatic?" I said, my voice steady. "I'm not dramatic, I'm exact. This number here, $3,864, saved you from default, and you still had the audacity to mock me at this table. Tell me, does that sound like useless to you?" He had no words. His mouth opened and then closed, and his face flushed red as if the heat of his own shame finally touched him. My sister whispered something about how she didn't ask me to cover her rent, but I turned to her and replied, "No, you didn't ask, you begged, sobbing on the phone about being thrown out, and I gave you the money without hesitation. And the next time I saw you, you laughed about how I didn't have my life together. You took my help but never respected the hand that offered it. Do you understand how deeply cruel that is?" She lowered her gaze, picking at her napkin, suddenly so small and quiet when before she had been so quick to join in my humiliation. I felt the years of invisible labor rise in my throat, and for once I let them pour out instead of swallowing them back. "Do you know what it's like?" I said, voice trembling with both rage and liberation. "To stay up late calculating every bill, every paycheck, making sure there was enough for all of you while listening to the very people I saved call me a failure? Do you know what it's like to sacrifice vacations, hobbies, even my own dreams just to keep this family afloat, only to be told I was nothing?" My eyes swept around the table, daring any of them to answer, but none did. The truth had silenced them more effectively than any scream could have. My fiancé spoke then, his voice calm but firm. "I've watched her work tirelessly. I've watched her stress over money that wasn't even her responsibility. I've watched her give more than anyone I know, and I've watched her get nothing but cruelty in return. Tonight you should be celebrating her engagement, but instead you chose to degrade her. That ends now." His words struck like a hammer on stone, and I saw the cracks widen in their armor. For once, someone outside the family was bearing witness, confirming what I had endured for years, and they could not dismiss him the way they dismissed me. My mother finally spoke, her voice sharp. "You didn't have to do any of that, no one asked you to." I laughed bitterly because the lie was so absurd. "No one asked me? Every single time one of you called me crying, desperate, begging, it was me you asked. And every single time I said yes. Don't you dare erase the truth just because it's inconvenient for your pride." The bitterness in my laugh made even my father flinch, because he knew. He remembered the nights he had called me after his doctor appointments, short of breath, worried about bills piling up, and how I had reassured him while wiring money I couldn't afford to lose. He knew, and yet he had stayed silent all those years. That silence hurt almost more than the insults. I turned to him directly, my voice softer but cutting. "Dad, I covered your treatments because I love you. But you let them tear me down in front of you time and time again, and you said nothing. Do you realize how abandoned that made me feel?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes, and in that moment I realized I would never get the apology I deserved from him or any of them, but I didn't need it anymore. My worth was not waiting for their recognition. It was standing in the truth I had finally spoken. The food on the table had gone cold, untouched, as the confrontation consumed the night. The Christmas lights twinkled almost mockingly, a backdrop of cheer against the storm unraveling within the family. My mother tried to regain control by saying, "Enough, let's just eat and forget this nonsense." But I shook my head, firm and unyielding. "No, we don't get to forget. You don't get to humiliate me publicly and then sweep the truth under the rug. Not this time. This is the night everything changes." And then I said the words that had been building in me for years but never dared to escape. "I am done. Done being your scapegoat, done being your wallet, done being your invisible backbone. From now on, there will be boundaries, and if you can't accept them, then you can live without me." The look on their faces was almost comical, as if they had never imagined that I, the quiet middle child, the one they had branded useless, could walk away. But the truth was I had already started building a life beyond them, a life with someone who valued me, a future that didn't depend on their validation. My fiancé and I had savings, plans, dreams, and most importantly, freedom. The room sat in stunned silence as my words echoed, and I realized something incredible. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of their judgment, their disapproval, their cutting remarks, because they no longer defined me. I defined myself now. The balance of power had shifted permanently. I could see it in their eyes, the dawning realization that the person they had taken for granted, the person they had mocked, was the one who had held the family together. And now that person was done. I gathered my folder, tucking the receipts back inside. Not because I needed to prove anything further, but because I wanted the finality of closing that chapter. My fiancé stood with me, his hand steady on my back, and together we stepped away from the table. I looked back one last time, not with anger but with resolve. "Merry Christmas," I said, my tone even almost gentle. "Consider it the first one where I finally give myself the gift of freedom." And with that, we walked out of the house, leaving behind the stunned silence of a family that had lost the only person who ever truly carried them. The cold night air outside felt cleaner, sharper, like a baptism into a new life. Snow crunched beneath our feet, and as we reached the car, my fiancé squeezed my hand and whispered, "I've never been prouder of you." Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain but from release, from the knowledge that I had finally chosen myself. And though I knew the days ahead might bring guilt trips, manipulation, and attempts to reel me back in, I also knew I would never return to the silence that once chained me. That night at Christmas dinner was my breaking point, but it was also my rebirth. The drive away from my parents' house that night was eerily quiet, the snow falling in soft flakes against the windshield, the headlights cutting through the darkness as if illuminating the road of my new life. My fiancé kept one hand on the wheel and the other clasped around mine, and though he didn't say much, the warmth in his grip spoke volumes, telling me without words that I had done the right thing, that I was no longer alone. Yet even as I felt the exhilaration of finally standing up for myself, a heaviness settled in my chest, because the truth is that walking away from family, no matter how toxic, leaves a scar. And in that silence of the night I could feel both the freedom and the grief. The next morning my phone began to vibrate relentlessly, message after message, call after call, each one dripping with the guilt and manipulation I had come to expect. My mother left the first voicemail, her voice sharp and condescending as ever. "Emily, how dare you humiliate us in front of your fiancé? Do you have any idea how ungrateful you sounded? After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us." I almost laughed at the irony, because the receipts I had laid out were the very proof that everything they claimed to have done for me was actually the reverse. But instead I simply deleted the voicemail. My brother's text came next, filled with insults, calling me selfish, dramatic, and reminding me that family doesn't air dirty laundry in public. I replied with just 2 words, "Pay me." His angry emojis that followed were enough proof that my words had cut deep. Then came my sister, attempting a softer tactic, texting that she was sorry if I felt hurt, but that I should have talked privately instead of making a scene. I stared at the message, recognizing the manipulation behind the faux apology, and typed back, "The scene was made when Mom called me useless in front of everyone. I simply told the truth." She never responded after that. My father finally called late that evening, his voice weary, almost broken. "Emily," he sighed, "I know things got out of hand, but you shouldn't have walked out. It's still Christmas, we're still family." For a moment I wanted to cry, because part of me longed for him to defend me, to finally acknowledge all the times he had stayed silent, but the words I needed never came. Instead I answered, "Dad, I walked out because no one ever stood up for me, not even you. I love you, but I won't let myself be destroyed just to keep the peace anymore." He said nothing, and in that silence I knew he understood but didn't have the courage to admit it. Days turned into weeks, and the family drama became the unspoken storm hanging over every relative. Cousins reached out saying they had heard whispers about the dinner, some expressing quiet admiration, others pretending neutrality. For once, the spotlight wasn't on my supposed failures but on the uncomfortable truth I had unveiled. And that truth spread through the family like wildfire. My mother tried to regain control by rewriting the narrative, telling anyone who would listen that I had attacked her on Christmas and disrespected the family name. But for every lie she told, I had proof, and when a few brave relatives asked me directly, I calmly showed them the folder of receipts. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and slowly the tide began to turn. People realized that the story of the useless child was nothing more than a cruel invention to mask their dependence on me. My fiancé encouraged me not to engage too much, not to waste my energy defending myself against those determined to misunderstand me, and he was right, but there was a certain power in letting the truth ripple outward on its own, in watching the false image of me crumble without me having to lift a finger. One evening about a month later there was a knock on my door. It was my sister, looking smaller than I had ever seen her, her eyes red and swollen. She asked if she could come in, and though part of me wanted to slam the door, another part of me, the part that had always been too forgiving, stepped aside. She sat on my couch and whispered that she didn't realize how much I had done for her, that she had taken me for granted, that she thought I would always be there no matter what. I listened quietly, my arms folded, because I needed to hear not just her words but her sincerity. And for the first time I believed she was truly remorseful. But forgiveness, I realized, did not mean returning to the old dynamic. "I accept your apology," I told her, "but things can't go back to the way they were. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on respect, not exploitation." She nodded through tears, and though I didn't fully trust her yet, I knew that maybe one relationship in my family could be rebuilt carefully. My brother, however, was another story. He doubled down, telling anyone who would listen that I was bitter and jealous, that I was trying to make myself look better by tearing everyone else down. I ignored him because the truth was, his words no longer had power over me. The more he ranted, the more desperate he appeared. And slowly even those who once believed him began to see through the act. My mother remained unyielding, clinging to her pride as if admitting the truth would unravel her entire identity. She continued to send me guilt-laden messages about abandoning family and forgetting where I came from, but I left them unread. I had learned the power of silence, the kind of silence that wasn't submission but strength, the silence of someone who no longer needed their approval. And with every day that passed, I felt lighter, freer, more alive. The wedding planning continued, and as I built the guest list, I realized something extraordinary. For the first time in my life, I had the power to choose who deserved to celebrate with me. It wasn't about excluding for revenge, it was about protecting my peace. When the invitations went out, my parents and siblings didn't receive one. Instead, my guest list was filled with friends who had stood by me, mentors who had guided me, colleagues who had respected me, and the family members who had quietly cheered me on from the sidelines. The day of the wedding, as I walked down the aisle, I felt a sense of joy and serenity I never thought possible, not because my family was absent, but because the people present were those who truly valued me. And when I said my vows, I realized that this wasn't just the start of a marriage, it was the start of a new chapter where I was no longer defined by what others thought of me, but by what I knew to be true about myself. My family eventually learned to live with the boundaries I had drawn. Some relationships withered away, others cautiously healed, but the one thing that never changed was the knowledge that I had reclaimed my power. That Christmas night had been my breaking point, but it had also been the moment that gave me back my voice, my dignity, and my freedom. And though it hurt to cut those ties, I understood now that sometimes the bravest, most necessary revenge is not vengeance at all, but simply living well, living free, and refusing to let anyone ever call you useless again. The weeks after my wedding unfolded like sunlight after a long storm, the air brighter, the days lighter, and for the first time in years I woke up each morning without the heavy ache of dread pressing down on my chest. The ceremony had been everything I dreamed of, not because of extravagant details or magazine-worthy perfection, but because every face in that room was someone who genuinely loved me, who had stood by me, who celebrated not just my marriage but my liberation. Walking down the aisle without the weight of my family's judgment felt like shedding chains I didn't realize had dug so deep into my skin. Yet freedom has a cost, and mine came in the form of the backlash that erupted once word spread that my parents and siblings hadn't been invited. The morning after my wedding, my phone lit up with notifications like fireworks. Dozens of missed calls from my mother, angry texts from my brother, cryptic social media posts from my sister. My mother's voice rang through voicemail after voicemail, dripping venom. "How could you embarrass us like this, Emily? Do you have any idea what people are saying? Do you know how humiliating it is to not be invited to your own daughter's wedding? After all we've done for you, you spit in our faces." I listened to each word, calm now in a way I never could have been before, and when she ended with, "You'll regret this, mark my words," I simply pressed delete. Because what she didn't understand was that regret had no place in my life anymore. My brother's messages were harsher, calling me selfish, vindictive, warning me that I had destroyed any chance of being part of the family again. His words once would have shattered me, but now they rang hollow, empty threats from a man who had long lived off my quiet sacrifices. I texted back one sentence: "You lost me long before I lost you." He never replied. My sister, though, was different. She wrote, "I know you hate us, but did you really have to cut me out completely?" I stared at her words for a long time, remembering the night she had cried on my couch apologizing, swearing she wanted to change, and I realized that this was the moment to test her sincerity. So I responded, "I don't hate you, but if you want a relationship with me, it has to start with respect. That means no more siding with Mom when she tears me down, no more laughing at my expense, no more silence when I'm being attacked. If you can give me that, there's a place for you in my life. But it won't be on terms that destroy me anymore." She sent back only, "I'll try." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough for me to leave a door cracked open. Then came the extended family. Some cousins called me brave, telling me they admired the way I had stood up for myself. Others whispered that I had gone too far, that no matter what, family should be included. But those whispers didn't sting the way they once would have because I knew the truth. Including people who treated me as disposable wasn't family, it was self-destruction. And I had chosen self-respect instead. As the months passed, the attempts to guilt me continued, though weaker each time. My mother sent long letters filled with dramatic lines about blood being thicker than water, and the curse of children turning against their parents. I read them once, then tucked them into a drawer, not to treasure but to remind myself of how far I'd come. My father occasionally called, quieter than before, asking to meet, saying he missed me. Part of me ached when I heard his voice, because the little girl in me still longed for her father's approval, still wished he had stood up for me at that dinner table. But another part of me, the woman who had walked out into the snow that Christmas night, knew better. I agreed to see him only on neutral ground at a cafe near my office, and when we met he looked older, smaller, as if the weight of silence had aged him. He said, "Emily, I don't know how to fix this, but I don't want to lose you completely." I looked at him and for the first time spoke without fear. "Dad, you already lost me when you let them tear me down year after year without saying a word. If you want me in your life now, it has to be different. You can't stay silent anymore. You either stand up for me or you stand apart from me. There's no middle ground left." He nodded slowly, his eyes wet, and though I didn't know if he could change, I knew I had given him the choice. The power was no longer his, it was mine. My mother, on the other hand, refused to yield. She escalated, sending angry relatives to plead her case, framing me as the cruel child who abandoned her aging parents. I let them talk, I let them accuse, And then I calmly showed them the receipts, the years of proof of my quiet sacrifices. Some walked away ashamed, others clung to her story, but none of it mattered because I no longer needed to convince anyone. The truth spoke for itself. With every season that passed, I felt the distance grow, but so did my peace. My marriage flourished in the absence of constant family drama. My career thrived when I no longer drained myself rescuing others, and for the first time I had savings that were truly mine. I discovered hobbies I had long abandoned: painting, traveling, writing, and each brushstroke, each journey, each page felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had been forced to bury. 1 year later, as Christmas approached again, I decorated my own tree in my own home, the lights twinkling against ornaments that reflected joy instead of pain. My husband wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "This is our tradition now, one built on love, not on cruelty." And I realized he was right. The ghosts of that dinner table still lingered in my memory, but they no longer haunted me. They were simply reminders of how far I had come, of how strong I had grown. Sometimes, when people ask me if I regret cutting my family out of my wedding, I smile softly and say, no, because I didn't cut them out. They cut themselves out every time they chose to belittle me, every time they used me, every time they let their pride matter more than my dignity. My wedding wasn't about exclusion, it was about inclusion. Only for those who truly valued me. And that, I realized, was the truest revenge of all. Not anger, not spite, but a life lived on my terms, filled with love, respect, and peace. Years slipped by faster than I expected, and with each passing season I found myself further and further away from the suffocating grip of the people who once defined me. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but rather a slow, steady rebuilding of my life, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. When I first walked out of that Christmas dinner, snow crunching beneath my boots, I thought the hardest part would be staying away, resisting the familiar pull of guilt and obligation. But I learned that the real challenge wasn't distance, it was redefining who I was when I was no longer the family scapegoat, no longer the invisible provider, no longer the useless child. At first, the silence from them was deafening. My mother tried to break through it with rage-filled letters, my brother with petty insults, my sister with half-hearted apologies, and my father with quiet sighs of regret. But eventually even their noise faded, replaced by the quiet acknowledgement that I wasn't coming back to play my old role. And in that silence I discovered myself. My marriage blossomed without the constant interference of toxic relatives. My husband and I built a home filled with laughter, filled with peace, filled with the kind of stability I had once thought impossible. For the first time, holidays weren't battlegrounds of judgment and manipulation. They were warm gatherings with chosen family, friends who loved us sincerely. I found joy in traditions of my own: baking cookies on Christmas Eve, hiking on Thanksgiving morning, lighting candles on New Year's with wishes spoken aloud not out of fear but out of hope. My career too began to soar once I stopped draining my energy on rescuing others. I took risks I had once been too exhausted to take, pursued opportunities that once felt out of reach. Promotions came, recognition followed, and soon I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And the irony was not lost on me. The useless child was the one who had built the most stable, fulfilling life of them all. But while I was moving forward, my family remained stuck in their cycles. Word trickled back to me through relatives, stories whispered at gatherings I no longer attended. My brother's debts had caught up to him again, this time with no one to bail him out. My sister bounced from one failed job to another, never quite finding her footing. My mother clung to her pride, still spinning stories about how I had betrayed her, while my father quietly aged under the weight of regret. And though part of me wanted to feel triumphant, I realized I didn't need to. Their struggles weren't my revenge. They were simply the natural consequences of a life lived without accountability. My revenge was my freedom, my peace, my joy. Still, there were moments when the past tried to reach out and pull me back. One Christmas, 3 years after the infamous dinner, I received an unexpected knock at my door. When I opened it, there stood my father, older, friendlier, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched his hat. My heart clenched because despite everything, he was still my father. He asked if he could come in, and for a long moment I hesitated, torn between the instinct to protect my peace and the lingering love of a daughter who once only wanted his approval. Finally, I stepped aside. We sat in my living room, the glow of my Christmas tree casting soft light across his tired face, and he said words I never thought I'd hear. "Emily, I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I should have spoken up. I let you carry too much and I stayed silent when you needed me most. That silence has haunted me." Tears pricked my eyes, not because his apology erased the years of hurt, but because it was the acknowledgement I had long craved. I told him, "I can't forget what happened, but I can choose to move forward. If you truly want a relationship with me now, it has to be built on honesty and respect. No more silence." He nodded, his eyes glistening, and for the first time in decades, I felt like my father saw me, not as the scapegoat, not as the invisible provider, but as his daughter. That moment didn't heal everything, but it began a new chapter with him, one where boundaries existed but love was possible. My mother, on the other hand, remained unyielding. She refused to admit any wrongdoing, clinging to her version of the story with a desperation that was almost pitiable. She continued to tell relatives that I had abandoned her, painting herself as the victim, and at first it bothered me. But over time I realized her refusal to change was no longer my burden. Her words no longer defined me. Her bitterness was hers to carry, not mine. The final twist came years later when my aunt passed away and left behind a small inheritance. Unlike the chaos that surrounded wills and money in so many families, this time I wasn't entangled. The inheritance wasn't large, but it was enough to cause whispers, enough to reignite old resentments. My mother and brother tried to contest it, dragging my name into arguments even though I wanted no part of it. But the executor of the estate shut it down quickly, presenting documents my aunt had prepared years earlier. In those documents was a letter, written in my aunt's delicate handwriting, addressed to me. It said, "Emily, I always saw the way you carried the family when no one noticed. This small gift is to remind you that someone did notice, someone did value you. Don't ever let them convince you otherwise." Reading those words, tears streamed down my face, because even if my immediate family had failed me, someone in the extended family had seen the truth. And that validation mattered more than any inheritance ever could. By then, my life had grown so far beyond the shadow of my parents' house that their drama seemed almost small, like echoes of a storm I had once survived. I had learned that revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about no longer letting their treatment define me. Revenge was in the joy of decorating my own Christmas tree without dread. Revenge was in hearing my husband call me brilliant, capable, cherished. Revenge was in waking up each day to a life I had built with my own hands, free from their cruelty. Sometimes people ask me if I ever reconciled with my mother, if there was ever a final peace. I answer honestly, no. Because peace isn't always about reconciliation, it's about acceptance. I accepted that she would never change, that her pride would never bend, that her version of the story would always paint me as the villain. And I accepted that it didn't matter. My truth was stronger. My life was proof. Looking back now, I see that the girl who once sat silently at Christmas dinners, biting her tongue while everyone mocked her, has become a woman who speaks without fear, who walks without chains, who lives without apology. And that transformation was the greatest revenge of all. When I look back now on everything that unfolded from that single night at Christmas dinner, I see not just a confrontation but a turning point, a dividing line between the life I once lived in silence and the life I chose for myself with courage. People often ask me what lesson I took from all of it, and the truth is there are many, but the most important is this: boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival. For years I thought that to love my family meant to sacrifice endlessly, to bend myself until I was breaking, to accept humiliation because it was easier than conflict. But what I learned that night when my mother called me useless is that love without respect is not love at all. It is control. And the only way to break free is to reclaim your voice and say no more. At first it feels terrifying because families like mine are built on the unspoken rule that one person will always carry the weight while the others take without thanks. To break that rule is to shatter the entire illusion, and when you do, the backlash is fierce. They call you selfish, ungrateful, vindictive. They twist your truth into betrayal because admitting their own cruelty is too painful. But here is the lesson I want everyone to hear. Their anger is not proof of your wrongness. It is proof of their loss of control. And when people lose the ability to control you, they will rage, but their rage cannot destroy you if you hold firm. I learned also that evidence matters. For years I kept records without knowing why: receipts, bank transfers, notes scribbled on calendars. I thought it was just habit, maybe even paranoia. But on that night those records became my shield, my undeniable truth. And it made me realize how often abusers thrive because the truth is hidden, because the victim doubts themselves. Documentation is power, not because you owe anyone proof of your worth, but because sometimes holding up the mirror is the only way to shatter the lies. Another lesson was about chosen family. I used to think family was defined by blood, by obligation, by the people who shared my last name. But the truth is, family is defined by love, respect, and reciprocity. The people who showed up for me were not always the ones who shared my DNA. They were friends who stood by me, mentors who guided me, my husband who believed in me even when I doubted myself. They were the ones cheering at my wedding, celebrating my victories, comforting me in struggles. And in their love I realized that being related doesn't make someone worthy of access to your life. Worthiness is measured in kindness, not in lineage. Breaking the cycle was not easy. There were nights when guilt crept in, whispering that maybe I was too harsh, that maybe I should apologize just to keep the peace. But peace built on my silence was not peace at all, it was imprisonment. And every time I looked at my own happiness, my marriage, my career, my freedom, I knew I had made the right choice. I had broken a generational pattern of silence and sacrifice, and in doing so, I had given myself the greatest gift: the chance to live authentically. I want anyone listening to my story to understand that speaking up may cost you relationships, but the relationships you lose were never built on love, they were built on control. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Yes, it hurts, but on the other side of that hurt is liberation. Another lesson I carry is that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same. I have forgiven my family, not for their sake but for mine, because carrying hatred only chained me to them longer. But forgiveness does not mean I have let them back into my life. Forgiveness means I set down the burden, but boundaries mean I don't pick it up again. You can forgive someone and still walk away. That is not cruelty, that is wisdom. I also learned that revenge does not have to be about destruction. When I was younger, I fantasized about yelling back, about finally making them feel as small as they made me feel. But the sweetest revenge was not lowering myself to their cruelty. It was rising above it. It was living well. It was succeeding in ways they told me I never could. It was proving that their words held no power. Revenge was peace. Revenge was joy. Revenge was freedom. Looking back, I realize my story is not just about one family dinner. It is about years of conditioning, years of silence, years of manipulation. And I know I am not alone. There are countless others sitting at tables where they are mocked, belittled, used, and told they are worthless. To them I say, you are not worthless. You are not useless. The very fact that they attack you so viciously is proof that you hold power they envy, strength they cannot comprehend. Stand up. Speak your truth. Show your receipts if you must. And if they cannot respect you, walk away with your head high. You do not owe your suffering to anyone. You do not have to destroy yourself to be considered loyal. Your worth exists whether they acknowledge it or not. In the end, my story is about reclaiming that worth. I am no longer the child silenced at the dinner table. I am a woman who knows her value, who built a life rooted in respect, who broke free from cycles of cruelty. And if my story can inspire even one person to stand up at their own breaking point, to say enough, and to walk into the snow toward freedom, then every tear, every scar, every sleepless night was worth it. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is not shouting or fighting, but simply living a life so full of love and peace that the ones who called you useless are left to face the truth of their own emptiness. As the years rolled forward and the echoes of that Christmas dinner faded into memory, I found myself returning often in thought to that night. Not with pain anymore, but with clarity. I could still see the flicker of candlelight across the table, still hear the clink of silverware before my mother's voice cut through the air like a knife, declaring me the most useless child she had. That sentence had been meant to break me, to remind me of my place at the bottom of their hierarchy, but instead it became the spark that lit the fire of my freedom. Life has a strange way of giving you moments that feel unbearable in the present but later reveal themselves as turning points, and for me that was the night everything changed. Before that dinner I thought I was destined to be the invisible backbone, the silent savior, the one who gave and gave while being ridiculed. After that night I realized I had always held the power. I had always been the one keeping them afloat, and the only thing missing was the courage to stop hiding it. The irony is almost poetic. They tried to humiliate me in front of my fiancé, but what they really did was give me the stage to reveal the truth. And once spoken, truth cannot be unsaid. My life now is unrecognizable compared to the one I lived back then. My home is filled with peace, my marriage rooted in mutual respect, my friendships flourishing. I celebrate holidays with joy rather than dread, surrounded by people who lift me up instead of tearing me down. I no longer measure my worth by whether my family acknowledges it, because I learned that their blindness was never my failure. Their cruelty was never my reflection. Their silence was never my shame. It belonged to them and I left it with them. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if I had stayed silent that night, if I had swallowed her words as I always did, if I had smiled weakly and carried on. I would probably still be paying their bills in secret, still listening to their insults, still trapped in a cycle that devoured me. And that thought sends chills through me, because it reminds me how close I came to living an entire life unlived. But instead I chose to speak, and in speaking I chose myself. The greatest gift I ever gave myself was the decision to stop asking for respect and start demanding it. And if respect could not be given, then distance would replace it. That is the boundary that saved me. My mother never changed. She clung to her pride until the end, spinning stories to protect her own image, convincing herself she was the victim of an ungrateful daughter. But I no longer needed her to change for me to heal. Healing came from within, from choosing to build a life where her voice no longer echoed in my head, where her words no longer carried weight. My father, though softened before he passed, finally admitting in his quiet way that he wished he had defended me. It wasn't the apology I had dreamed of as a child, but it was enough for the woman I had become, because I had already found peace without it. My siblings went their own way, each trapped in their own patterns, but I no longer felt the pull to rescue them. Their lives were theirs to live, their choices theirs to own, and that too was freedom. If you are listening to my story, maybe you see yourself in it. Maybe you know what it feels like to sit at a table where every word cuts you down, to carry burdens no one thanks you for, to give and give until you are hollow. Maybe you have been called names that echo in your head late at night, words meant to make you feel small. To you I say this: you are not small. You are not useless. You are not invisible. You hold power even if they refuse to see it, and one day you will discover that your breaking point is not the end, it is the beginning. The night my mother called me useless was the night I finally discovered my worth. It was the night I stopped being afraid. It was the night I walked into the snow and found my freedom. And that is why I share this story. Not to dwell on the pain, but to remind anyone who has ever felt trapped in a toxic family dynamic that you have a choice. You can break this cycle. You can walk away. You can build a life that is yours, filled with people who love you for who you are, not for what you can give them. My revenge was never about making them suffer. My revenge was living a life so radiant that their attempts to define me as useless became laughable. My revenge was joy, my revenge was love, my revenge was peace. And in the end, that is the sweetest revenge of all. So if you have ever had a moment where you felt broken, humiliated, discarded, let my story be a spark for you. Stand up. Speak your truth. Protect your boundaries. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away. And when you do, you will discover that the life waiting for you is brighter than you ever imagined. If you've ever had your own breaking point, your own moment when you finally said enough, share it in the comments below. You never know. Your story might be the light that helps someone else find their freedom. And if you want to hear more true stories of betrayal, boundaries, and transformation, don't forget to subscribe, because here we believe that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't cruelty. It's living the life they swore you never could.